joining us from. We are all in Venice, as you know, for our annual Venice Writing Retreat. We have some of our participants here behind us, and they will be contributing with questions, their questions. We would love you to put your questions in the chat as we go along. Just a couple of words from us. I'm Joanne, if you haven't met me before.
I'm Richard, if you haven't. I'm even Richard if you have met me before.
And I'm Fred.
Okay.
Meeting or not.
And Trish asked us to say a word or two about being in Venice, and that's easy because, you know, Venice has inspired writers for generation upon generation. And I was just saying again this time that every time we come to Venice, I notice different aspects, different things, and am sort of stimulated anew, because everywhere you turn is a sensory feast, you know, sounds and sights and smells. So that's what I've got to say
and
about
Prosecco.
writing. And yes, cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
So do you want to say a word about it?
We also have, did you say this? Members of our literary crowd behind us. They're being very quiet, but I hope that if we give a particularly brilliant answer, they will applaud. Right. What else?
All right. Is there anything else you want to say about?
Well, what I wanted to say is that even though, how many years have we been coming?
8.
8. And there was a whole new chapter we discovered in Venice this year. An area where we've never been, with the most beautiful little alleyway I've ever seen anywhere in the world. And
so no matter how many times you come, and some of our participants have come for year after year, each time there's something new, which is fabulous. Okay.
Okay. So we said unusually, in fact, uniquely, that this year we wouldn't accept any early questions from you, and we would trust upon our natural genius to answer your questions on the hoof. So we trust that we won't make too much of a mess of doing that. But just in case you didn't have your questions ready to fire at us on the chat, we asked our writing bunch here to bunch. Yeah, they're objecting to the word bunch. What shall I say? Flock. If we are the shepherds, they are the flock. To suggest a number of questions, and they did. And we will begin with one of them. And that is, it's rather a good one. What distinguishes a good creative writer from a blogger?
Well, okay, are you looking at me?
I'm looking at you.
All right. Well, I would say that a blogger can be a good creative writer. You know, the medium that you use to produce writing doesn't mean it's one thing or another. You can be a brilliant creative writer and put that brilliant creative writing into blogs. And in actual fact, this leads into another question that we were asked, and that is what defines creative writing? What differentiates creative writing from other forms of writing? And writing in blogs or any other medium can be there purely for practical and utilitarian purposes. Writing on signs is there to tell you purely factual things, don't go there or walk there. Academic writing has a specific purpose to transfer research ideas and knowledge. And writing can be there just to transfer facts, and some blogs can be there just to give you facts, say about travel destinations, or where you can get good ice creams in Venice. And then, that can be purely factual, and you wouldn't necessarily recognize it as creative. But I think creative writing employs techniques that immerse us in the time and the place that you are writing about, that you are describing. Creative writing is manipulative in that it manipulates our empathy and our senses by using certain skills, by showing us specific details, using strong verbs and nouns, by placing us inside the moment so that we are there with the writer, and placing us, allowing us to experience it at the same time and place as they are. And that would be my definition of creative writing. Do you?
I was just wondering, like, is Substack a form of blogging, or is it something in between creative literature and blogging? And because Substack is definitely more literary than your average blog about where to find the best ice cream, but it's still, I think, a way of blogging. Yeah,
and that's why I say the medium doesn't.
And it's a sort of new form, isn't it? It's like if you have high standard writing, you can move to Substack.
Yeah.
And then you're in a different field almost.
I just wanted to say, not in answer to the question, but as a kind of general point, that I respect anyone who makes their living from writing down words. And that includes writing down the words that appear inside every box of medication you've ever bought. Actually, we're all on a spectrum, many kinds of spectrum, naturally. And the writer of medical information, it's great. I think if you're earning your living from writing words, you deserve a special place in, well, somewhere else.
Yes.
Later on.
So, somebody has posted a question on the chat, and that is, I'm not quite sure what it means. How do you focus on the conclusion? So let's rephrase that to make sense of it. You don't have to answer it, Josie. Don't get prepared.
I'm thinking.
How much attention should you pay to the conclusion of your story? And I'm going to answer that to begin with. In Hollywood, there's a saying that goes around that says, if you don't spend 80% of your time thinking about the ending, you will have a flop of a screenplay. And it's interesting because the ending is obviously what you leave your reader with. It's the last thing they read of your story. And if it's flabby and if it's not satisfactory, they are unlikely to read in the next of your many books. So it is quite important. The second thing I want to say about endings is that beginnings are very easy, because we might have been thinking about them for months or years, and we've got them pretty pat. That's not to say they work, but we've done a lot of thinking about them. Again, it's in the nature of things. Fred, are you taking out your chocolates?
No, sorry. Yeah. And just to add to that, I think that the ending makes you write the beginning better and the middle, because if you know your destination, then everything that you write leading up to that ending will take your story forward, which is what good writing should do. And if you don't know, at least vaguely, where you're going to end, you could go off on all sorts of tangents as you're going along. So that's my little addition to.
I had the little, this afternoon when we walked around Venice, little discussion with one of the participants about how she wondered how somebody structured his book, whether they set out all the different chapters and then filled in all the blanks with an ending inside, a proper ending, an ending that you knew how it's going to end, or whether you work and then towards, while you write, you think, okay, this could be a proper ending. And I said, well, I think it differs for everyone. I mean, I often write nonfiction, but I still don't know how it's going to end. And halfway, I think, okay, well, this is definitely how it's got to end. Whereas other people, I think, have an ending in mind before they start writing even. And you work your book towards that particular ending. So I think it's different for everyone, which is a bit of a wussy answer.
Specifics of ending, but I would still argue that you kind of know more or less where it's going, so that you know more or less your direction. Yeah, that's, I would.
Some people, the extreme pantsers, the people who claim not to have any idea of what's coming in their books, the people who write by the seats of their pants, claim that they don't know the ending. Ian Rankin claims that he doesn't know who committed the murder that his book is devoted to until he gets near to the end. But I'm not sure that he's telling the truth.
Yeah.
All right. All right, so here's another question from one of our Venice participants, Diana. She said, talk about needs and wants. All right, and this is a very important distinction. We all know that if you've got a protagonist in your story and you're writing creative fiction, all fiction is creative, if you're writing fiction, then you need to know what your protagonist wants when you begin your story. You need to know that they want, let's say, revenge. Their family has been murdered by the mafia. They want to get back at the murderers. It's a very, very important also to know what they need. So what they need in that case might well be to forgive the killers for their spiritual peace. It might well be that they need to learn that it's not revenge that they want, that they need, but forgiveness. So that is a simple distinction. But there's almost always a distinction between what a character wants or thinks they want and what they really need. And quite often the story is all about how they learn that distinction. Yes?
Yes,
I thought that was rather well put.
I thought that was well put. Yeah. So the character might be desperately trying to find the thing that they want, because let's also say that every character wants something. If a character doesn't want something, there's no story, obviously, because nothing moves, nothing changes, nothing is at stake. So a character wants something and will face obstacles, and the story might be about what they want, but then as Richard says, during that process, they learn that actually what they really need is something different.
Yeah, can be very sobering.
Yeah.
In fact, of course, life is like that too. We think we want great wealth. We end up knowing we want our children to forgive us.
Yeah.
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 Okay. So here's a question from the chat box, which I quite like because it's easy to answer, I guess. Is it legal to write, legal note, to write a fantasy adventure about a famous historical person such as Alexander the Great, from an historical or biblical time, when there's no information or very little information about them. Yes, it is totally legal. Is it legitimate? Yes, it is totally legitimate. You can also tell lies about them with impunity. You can dress them up in any way you like.
Yes.
There are no barriers to doing anything you like to dead people.
Absolutely. And they can't sue you because you can't defame a dead person.
Yeah.
Is it so?
That is so.
Because what if the family objects?
Too bad.
Too bad.
Is it?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
In America, you can also tell lies about the living, because your First Amendment, generally speaking, your First Amendment rights protect you, free speech amendment rights protect you from, you can still defame people, but it's quite difficult to prove it in America. In England, it's very easy to prove that you've been defamed, or comparatively easy.
If you're alive.
If you're alive.
Yeah.
If you're dead, it's very difficult to bring a legal action.
Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah.
anything to add? Nothing to add?
No.
Another question from the chat things. How do you grow an audience for your books? Fred.
That's an easy one, isn't it? I don't know. I mean,
it's one we're all trying to
these
answer.
days, I guess social media is extremely important. You know, have a presence, Facebook, Twitter, or X, what it's called these days, Instagram. I've tried for my book to you know, when you go on Instagram and you post something about your book, you immediately get responses from people you've never seen, heard, or anything of. And they usually live in India or somewhere. And they say, I will be very happy to promote your book and give it widespread attention on Instagram if you pay me X dollars. And they'll write a review for you, a glowing review for $20 or something. And I thought, you know, it wasn't a lot. So I thought one of them, I thought, I'm going to give you a try. So I said, well, give me your email. I'll send you a PDF of the book, write a review and see what happens. So he or she, I forgot whether it was a he or she, did that. The review was sort of compiled from bits and pieces that they read online, you know, because your book comes online with a little summary. And they threw in a few glowing remarks. And that was the review. And I don't think I got one extra reader out of that thing.
So don't do that.
That said, if you can have an influencer with real influence, I would certainly try to go for that. But I don't know how to distinguish the real influencers from the fake influencers. I mean, you can look at the number of followers, obviously. I don't know if that, you know, if I write a book and somebody who's very influential in the fashion world will put it on her or his blog or his Instagram account, I don't think it will make a hell of a difference. So you have to pick and choose who to use, but it is.
Well, that's just one way.
It's a way.
It's one way.
Yeah.
I mean, the best way is to write good books.
Well, I don't think so.
Well, I do think so.
Yeah. Because I think there are many, many, many good books that receive no attention whatsoever.
I know that. But if you don't have a good book,
you still sell a lot sometimes.
Okay, Fred, you can do the bad book.
And, no, it doesn't work like that.
But
it
is true that if you write a series of very poor books, you will get fewer sales than if you write a series of good books. And yeah, I mean, this is not an easy question. We've had whole webinars on the question of how do you promote and market books, particularly when they are self-published, or as we say, independently published. So with that rather unsatisfactory conclusion.
I think you also, as a live person, you have to be visible. Like a friend of mine self-published a book that first had been published by one of the major publishers in South Africa. Then he himself thought, it's not selling enough. I'll take it, republish it myself, go on the road with that book. So he went to every little town, took the book with him, organized the reading, And he sold many more than he had sold through the official publisher, because people love it when you're there and you sign the book and you talk about your book. I mean, it's still small scale, of course, but also word gets around that so-and-so is doing this book tour and people write about you, and you sort of become part of the swirl of information.
And I think the personal touch, which is what you're talking about, but also online, because there are writers who spend their morning writing and their whole afternoon writing, promoting, but that also includes writing to people personally, answering all the emails.
Neil Meyer does that.
That's right. And nurturing your readers, your community, and there are lots of book bloggers out there. I've discovered there are a whole lot of book bloggers. So nurture the book bloggers, because they have followers. Send them a copy. Ask if they like, make personal contact with them, make friends with them.
And ask people to put reviews on Amazon, Goodreads, all those kind of outlets. Because people, if they want to go order a book, they go on Amazon and they see 14 reviews, all 5 stars or whatever, they're more likely to buy the book than no reviews on Amazon. Because then they think, oh. Okay,
can we move on?
We can move on.
I'm going to take another question from our Venetian crowd. Is that all right? Crowd? Yeah. Okay. Stephen King said, "You can't write, really, unless you have talent." Is that true?
Are you looking at me?
No, I'm looking at us.
Okay. Well,
we run a writing school.
Yes.
So we're biased. So you have to take everything we say with a pinch of salt. Because guess what we're going to say?
I sometimes wonder what we mean by talent. Maybe, maybe it's something you're born with, who knows? Or maybe you read widely and with great sensitivity over many years, and you absorbed skills as you went along. And so you come into it with perhaps a slight advantage. And in our writing school, we do see that some people start with that slight advantage that, they can write. They've absorbed certain of the skills of writing. But then we have also had people come into our writing school that at first struggled. They really struggled. But they had the doggedness to keep going. They took suggestions and they wept a bit, then rewrote, then took on suggestions, wept a bit, rewrote and rewrote. And we have someone that we're very proud of who came in very early years of our writing school, who stuck at it. And to my mind, doggedness is far more important than what we call a natural talent. There are people that you say, oh, look, she has that way with words, but doesn't have that doggedness to take the suggestions, learn, rewrite again, stick at it, say this didn't work, let me start again, let me do it again. And this person we're talking about, who could write, but but took suggestions, took more suggestions over many years, and is now been accepted by a big publisher, and her book is being published. And it's testament to that doggedness that I think is more important than anything else for a writer.
And a passion about writing.
Passion, yeah.
But isn't talent also way too stretched out? I mean, your person that you now refer to might have talent for one specific that you have to find. You know,
Yes.
I wouldn't be very talented when it comes to writing a long novel, but I can do other things. And my talent lies in, it's a bit like a footballer, you know, you can be an attacker, you can be a goalkeeper. A goalkeeper has probably no talent to be the attacker and the other way around. So I think with writing, there's so many substrata of writing that you have to find out for yourself where your talent lies. And if it's short story, poetry, whatever, you'll find it and then you work your 10,000 hours in that.
Mm.
Okay, here's a question that follows on from that, from Howard Donaldson. He says, writing, and then in brackets, poor poetry is currently lighting my heart fire. Am I merely increasing my chances of dying penniless? I'm afraid so. We were talking earlier this week about the fact that in the 1920s, it seemed to be possible to publish a slim volume of poetry and to live off the proceeds for 2 or 3 years. I'm afraid that is no longer possible. Unless you get a sponsor, I suppose. If you could get Kellogg's to sponsor you.
But let's talk about wants and needs. Your need, it lights your heart fire. So,
Yeah.
you know, it's worth it. We don't do things. That's the other thing. That
Man
I
is an
just like
economic animal.
I know, but you know, if you want to be a writer, you don't do it because you think, I'm going to write this and make a fortune. You don't. You write it because, well, I was talking about this with one of the participants here. You have to enjoy the process. You have to love having a project, writing, rewriting, seeing it improve before your eyes. You don't want to just have it finish as quickly as possible and get to the end and hope you'll make a fortune. You know, that doggedness, that passion, that wanting to make it as good as it can be, that is important in its own right. And that is why we do it. And sometimes then it gets picked up and someone publishes it or loves it or tells you it changed their life. And that's what it's about.
Okay, another one?
No, I have nothing to add there.
Good, okay. I quite like this one. Would it be difficult to write about one main protagonist and then include a lot of character stories that touches on the protagonist's life and then reach a conclusion? This sounds to me like a volume of short stories that they call a novel.
Yeah, yeah.
Short stories that add up to a novel.
Linked short stories.
Linked short stories.
Yes.
For instance, what is that one about? Oh my God, I'm going to forget both the writer. A New England woman, a flinty woman.
Oh,
Yes, it was a series of short stories set in a town. There was a main protagonist, but she didn't appear in all of the stories. And it was very, very, very good. And if I could remember, I promise you, I would tell you who.
I think Portrait with Keys by Vladislavich was a bit like that. Because it had, I mean, it sort of fitted together. It was a portrait with keys, as he said. And there were different, I think there were different protagonists, but there was about one person, basically. And they were set in different places. But it's, I mean, it's a long time since I've read the story, but I thought it was very cleverly done that it was basically about one person, totally different stories that all slotted in together into a bigger whole.
Well, I mean, just thinking now, speculatively, if you write a story about, if your objective is to write a story about a woman, and then you tell the stories about her husband, her children, and her father, you will actually get one of those, you know, in the corporate world. Remember that? corporate world,
Yes.
where you have a 360-degree assessment of somebody,
Oh, yes.
you'd get that kind of effect, because all of them would impinge on the main character, and you would have.
So it would be like a huge character study as
Yeah,
opposed to a story with an arc.
But if you did it with each of those stories had an arc,
Yes.
you
yes,
could do a
they
very
would be
interesting
linked.
thing.
Yes. And
Go ahead, whoever that was.
But may I
Sylvia.
also just say that somebody here has an interesting project. I'm not going to say who, and I'm not going to give you any details about it, but I hope she doesn't mind that I mentioned, but I think it's linked and I think it's interesting. So she has a number of equal protagonists, and she's telling this at the beginning. Each of them starts out in a completely different place and different stage, and we leap between. So we start with one of them, then we have the start of the next one, and then we have the start of the next one, and they seem to have no link, and only almost at the very end, those four characters come together in a cataclysmic way and change each other's lives forever in their meetings. So we at first see their stories up until that point, and when they come together, they affect and influence each other forever. So, but
in an incandescent way.
In an incandescent way. But each of them is an equal protagonist. None is less than another.
Okay, so Lisa Ann Julian, Lisa Ann, thank you very much. From my small clue, she gave me the title.
Oh.
It's the Olive Kettridge.
Ah, yes.
Did you get it too? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, another question from the hoi polloi. When I write, I hope that everyone will enjoy reading me, says Mama Power. All right. How do I then answer the question that always comes from publishers about who my target audience is? That's a nice question. Well, we have to take a leaf from the marketer's playbook, market research playbook. Market researchers say that when they develop a perfume, when a company develops a product of any kind, the advertising will identify a specific person as their target. So if it's perfume, they might say she is 38, she's professional, she's ambitious, she has a romantic streak. They will define a character and they will say, we will direct our advertising at her, at that character, a fictitious character. And it will, in fact, of course, affect a whole bubble of people around her. And that's how they operate. And it's a very successful advertising mantra. And we've increasingly heard in the field of independent publishing that you need to think of that too. You need to think that way as well. Think about your ideal reader being somebody very specific. Like, if you want a very small readership, you could say a 93-year-old, somebody who still has all her marbles. But more generally, you would say a 24-year-old of this kind, with these aims and these ambitions and these fears and these vulnerabilities. Really, you're creating a character, and you're very good at that because you're a writer, a fiction. And you'd go for that.
But is it now before or after the book?
That's what I was
at any point.
Because you can start with that in mind, or you have finished your book and then you think, who are you going to sell it to?
That's right. Now, of course, if you're writing for a child audience, then you're going to use the vocabulary appropriate for that.
Yeah.
And if you're writing for a very sophisticated audience, then you'll use the vocabulary for that. And of course, there are people also who say they write to market. They write for fans of urban fantasy or lesbian fantasy. I mean, if you dig into Amazon, you will find that there are thousands of subcategories of readers. And some people go specifically for one of those and they design their narrative
So
for
it's
that
during
reader.
the writing that you
Before the
talk
writing.
about, before.
Before
But I
and
think
during.
this question was
It can be.
for when you finished your book.
But it
Oh,
can also
target.
be, I hadn't finished my answer because, no, I don't
No.
mean. You might have written a book and then you are marketing it.
Yeah.
If you are marketing it yourself. But the publisher will do this for you if you don't do it, if you're not publishing it.
Well, they often ask the question when you propose a manuscript. One of the questions is, who is your target market?
Yeah.
And then you have to think, and you think, it's a hard question.
It is.
Because often they use it as a way to reject.
Yeah.
They think, oh, well, we're not interested in that because it's not going to sell to that audience. So it's a tricky question.
Also small market. Yeah.
Yeah, niche.
Yeah.
Too niche for us.
Too niche
they'll
for
say.
us.
Yeah.
Mm.
So you have to be very careful when you have to answer that question.
But you're in an unusual position because you propose books before you write them. Whereas fiction writers write the books before they seek a publisher.
No,
generally
even,
speaking.
yeah, true.
Yeah.
But I think you have to be you can say, okay, I'm going to write a book that appeals to fantasy, dystopian, fiction readers, the people who like that. If you don't have a feel for it, if it's not authentic to you, I think you're not going to succeed. I think, you can decide, who am I going to write for before, or who does my book appeal to when you've written it? You can do either. But whichever thing you do, I think you need to have a feel for it. It needs to be authentic to you as a writer. If you're going to write dystopian science fiction, you need to love dystopian science fiction and you need to read a lot of it. And then you decide, okay, I'm going to write for this niche audience. Otherwise, write your book for you that's authentic, the kind of book you want to write, and then look at it and say, okay, who does this appeal to?
And you might find yourself with a book that appeals
Yeah.
to very few people.
You might.
That's right.
But I always say, and I think it's true, there's always a niche audience for every type of book, as long as you manage to target that specific niche. They need to know about the book, because these days, you can distribute all over the world. It's not like only South Africa or only England. It's like anywhere, because people can buy online. So you have to then find your niche and make sure that they know about your book. I think that's important these days.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Bonnie asks, it was recently pointed out to me by my publisher that my character winks too much. All right, during any given conversation, Bonnie's character, I can attest to this because we know the book, winked a lot. And she says, I struggle with the action during dialogue. All right, so this involves discussing the business of a scene. Most scenes, many scenes at least, consist of two people talking to each other, two or more people talking together. Most scenes are conversations. Well, some scenes are conversations. Yeah. Okay. The trouble is that a simple conversation that proceeds between two people can be like those TikTok conversations you see in some soap operas, where it goes tick-tock, tick-tock to the two characters, first Josie, then me, then Josie, then me, and it's very boring.
and it happens in a vacuum, kind of.
It happens in a vacuum. So you would want, in any decent scene, to have that conversation embedded in a bit of what we call business. It's a stage, it's a word that we've borrowed from the stage, where people are doing something. So the conversation now proceeds between a man who is sawing a plank and his wife, who comes in with a cup of tea for him. And he continues sawing, and they have the conversation, the difficult conversation, about what to do with Bonzo, the ancient spaniel. All right?
Yeah.
And it ends when he saws through the last little splinter of wood, and the plank falls to the ground with a crash. That's Bonzo.
Yeah.
Okay. So you would hope to find a subject, some action that they are doing, that somehow resonates with the conversation.
But that also gives us more about the characters themselves, because any novel, any creative, even creative nonfiction in a scene needs to give us more than just that narrow plot progression. We need to learn more about the characters. We need to see more about their world.
And their other passions and their other...
Exactly, yeah. So the business of it and the detail are going to provide that wider immersive experience where it's not happening in a vacuum. We are in their world with them, seeing how they live, seeing more about them as people. And you can also use that business to, as you said, to resonate with what they're actually saying. It's not easy. You have to be creative about finding something different that they can be doing, because there's a tendency to say, she sipped her wine, he sipped his wine.
Coffee, yeah.
She sipped her coffee,
yeah.
he sipped coffee. And it's not, you know,
It doesn't add anything.
It doesn't add anything.
It's like saying that he crossed his legs.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, who
now
gives
and again you can have a sip of a coffee, but it doesn't actually provide that business.
And you can cross your legs when it's significant.
Yeah.
Which it is sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. And to do with that winking, Bonnie, I know this because, and I think I mentioned it to you previously, that we want a character to have perhaps a distinguishing expression that they use, or a distinguishing piece of body language, something that they do that makes them different from the other characters. You only have to sprinkle that in, say, 3 times in the book, and it's enough. And I learned that because I once wrote a book where I wanted a character to say something, and she was a bit enthusiastic and childlike, and she said, Jeezy Weezy. And I had her saying Jeezy Weezy on every page. And then I read my draft, and it was too ghastly. And I had to take every, you know, in the end, I think I took every Jeezy Weezy out, because it becomes a tick. And
I was going to say one Jeezy Weezy is too many.
Yeah, I know. And because it irritates, it begins to irritate. I think in the end it was too many and I took them out. But, you know, you think, oh, it will make that character stand out because they have something that they do. But very quickly, your reader finds it starts to irritate, and that's called a writing tick. So winking can very easily become a tick.
Okay. While we tackle the next question, we would like those of you who haven't yet listed a question, please do so. The question that you've always wanted asked, answered, and you've never dared to ask. Now's the time. Right, the next question comes from Helen, right here in the room with us. And she says, can you teach craft? You can teach craft, we all agree, especially us at All About Writing.
Yeah.
But what about art? Can you teach art? And this is a variant, I guess, of can you teach talent?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But yes, I think you can,
I
for
do
myself. I think you can teach art. I'm not sure that in the end you can teach the most refined feeling for words. That is something that might come from having started reading when you were in your mother's womb. You know, I don't know where that comes from. It might be a brain, I don't know. But you can certainly teach them, you can teach people the techniques of craft that actually have an artistic effect.
That create art.
That create art. Just as you can teach somebody to wield a chisel, but can you teach them to be at least Michelangelo?
Yeah, you can teach them, well, let's say painting. You can teach them the finest brush techniques, and you can teach them perspective. And I do find it odd that people say, oh, but you can't teach creative writing. Well, then how can you teach people to paint, you know, or to play the piano? Every art form is able to be taught. The techniques are able to be taught. So it's composed of craft. But then, yes, you're right. There's some indefinable feel that perhaps some people have. And again, you know, is it genetic? Is it instilled early? But that feel for sentences, sometimes I think we can teach that to an extent just by giving suggestions and people, you know, suggesting that people redo it and rewrite and do it again, and they start to develop a feel for it.
Yeah.
But certainly they can learn the skills that will create a world that will immerse people in. It might not win the Booker Prize, but it can get published.
Don't you think it's important for an aspiring writer to know where his shortcomings are? Like,
Yeah.
you know, I can compare it to a musical instrument. Like I play the bass guitar and I'm technically not very good. You know, I can't do, but I have certain things that I can do, which will work very well with the music. You know, it's like feel for rhythm or feel for sound. And I think with writers, it's exactly the same. You know, you might not be a virtuoso with words, but you do have a great feel for story or build up or character.
Absolutely.
And then you concentrate. I mean, you learn the other bits that you're not so good at. You still need to know them, but you bring them into the bit that you are very good at. And then you build from that.
Yes.
So you build around your strengths.
Yeah.
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 And actually, if you look at any sportsman, you will find that he's got, like in tennis, that he's got this particular talent.
Exactly.
And
very forceful
develops the others. Yeah.
Pace or
and then you get
tactical insight.
Who's the new Spanish guy? Who's just
Brilliant. Yeah.
Alcaraz. He's good in every respect. And that's what astonishes everyone.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can have, and perhaps it leads into another one of our questions, but sometimes it comes down to the very basic of some people have such a feel for the rhythm, the sentences, sentence structure, the rhythm, how a short sentence leads into a long sentence.
Oh, yes, yes.
And
there was a question about that.
And that, you know, you can just, as you read it, it gives you joy because of the rhythm of those sentences. But not everybody has that feel. And in our mentoring program, I sometimes say to people, don't make all your sentences the same. Don't start every sentence as I was da-da, I da-da-da. As I was da-da, you know. And you pointed out, and they start to vary their sentences, and they get better, pointing out, you know, those things. And
yes, there's nothing as monotonous as 20 beautiful equal length sentences in a row.
yes,
Yeah.
all starting with the subordinate clause.
No, not even that, but
Well,
just, you know,
yeah.
that makes it much worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the question from someone here about
Shorter.
are short sentences better than long sentences? And I said, if you're Dr. Seuss, definitely. And then I said, I love a long sentence. And I loved the longest sentence I've ever come across, which was 11 pages long.
But you love it specifically because
I loved it because it was 11 pages
and
long.
they made it work. Yeah. I would say neither is better than the other.
Yeah.
Use whatever. You know, you can use your sentences to give us a feel like drums beating or like music playing. So if you want to lull us, write a long, flowing, mellifluous sentence. If you want to make our hearts race, write short, staccato sentences, abrupt. Vary them. Your sentences are your music. Play them, you know, so use long, use short, but they are the music that creates the drama, if music creates drama.
Okay, good. We've got a couple more questions have popped in. Oh
dear,
this is a challenging one. It's a hard one. It's potentially very long, but can we keep it short?
Yeah.
All right. What are the writing, Penelope says, what are the writing principles or laws of writing that never change? That's a good one.
It's a good one.
Clarity. All right. Try to be clear. Try to make your meaning shine through your sentences.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What else?
You know, this is a one that one could slightly argue with, because there are people who've said both. I would say show more than you tell. In other words, allow, but I'm going to qualify that by saying you show the evidence that allows your reader to interpret for you. There are people who say telling is good, but then because their characters tell interesting things, I think you have to do that very well to make it work. But that principle of showing, of giving the evidence and allowing your readers to interpret, okay. that is mine. Yeah.
I think composition, I would say. It's a bit like, you know, we often watch movies and then there's the sagging 2/3 along the way. With writing, it's the same. You know, you need to keep the reader interested. And I think composition is a major part for that.
By composition, you mean structure.
Yeah. So, intro, you know, it's the noble thing, but it is very important. Don't go on too long when you think, as a reader, you know, I know enough now. So, but I mean, it's a law to make a proper composition, but what a proper composition is like is something we also
most important of all, character, non-fiction, fiction. We need to identify with somebody, a character with something at stake.
Yeah,
you must
accompany with something at stake. All right, we're moving on.
Good question.
Thank you very much. Good question. We could have gone on for an hour. Can I use fictional characters for a memoir to preserve privacy for some characters, but not for others? Yes.
Yes, but she's not saying fictional. In other words, she's not, I'm presuming it's a she. Is it she?
Melissa.
Yeah. What you're saying is you're not making up characters in a memoir, you are giving some of them fictitious names.
Yeah, I would guess. Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely fine.
So you give fictitious names to the good people, but the bad people you reveal.
No, I think that's absolutely fine. You
I
know,
think you need to mention it though.
you need to
in the
mention that
introduction or
some
something.
names
Yeah.
have been
Altered.
changed. Yeah.
Okay, so Howard said, you've been very active, Howard, thank you. You can't teach imagination, but I think it's no accident that most creative people are acutely sensitive. Would you say oversensitive? No, that's true.
That's true.
We're sensitive to nuance. We're sensitive to detail.
We're sensitive when people are nasty to us.
Overly sensitive?
Yes, I am. I'm
No,
always been
I was joking.
sensitive.
Oh, I see.
I
I
was
thought
joking.
that was
No.
No.
What is the ideal length of a short story? Is there a market for short stories? Yes, there is. And you can find that market by Googling. There's an enormous market for short stories.
particularly online publishing.
Yeah, and there's an enormous market of competitions looking for short stories of every kind. Google them and look, you will find fantastic. Now, is there an ideal length? Well, one competition will say we need stories of up to 1,500 words, and another one will say anything over 5,000 words is
We once
too
read
long.
a definition, and I can't quite remember what it was. But that's also a kind of
Wasn't
movable
that
feast.
flash writing? What's
Yeah,
that again?
flash fiction can be. I mean, the famous story about the what's it, baby shoes.
Yeah.
Which is
Unused.
Unworn
For sale. Yeah. You got it back to front.
I got it back to front. But it's that short. I mean, and they're often little books of flash fiction, which are half a page or a page. But then a short story can go to 10,000 words. I think that's the kind of definition.
Convention.
The convention.
And then it becomes what? A novella after that?
Yeah.
Well, there's a gap between short story and novella.
Yeah.
20, 30,000.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So it's all.
But if you're publishing online, who's to say that 12,000 isn't a short story?
And that Vladislavich book I mentioned, I think had 4 or 5 stories, and they were each quite long.
Yeah.
But they weren't short stories. They weren't a novel. Together they formed a novel. So it's difficult.
Okay, so there are 2 questions left, and we've got 2.5 minutes.
Less in a minute.
But leave us a minute or two to say.
Okay, well, Penelope came back and she said, how does one create a flow, a consistent way of writing? Can you answer that in 3 sentences?
You will not always have the same feeling of flow when you sit down to write. But the point is that you have to sit down anyway. And some days it will feel like it plods, and some days it will feel like it flows. But when you come back and read it, you will not be able to tell the difference. That's my quick answer.
Okay, and I'm going to move straight on. Fred, I'll ask you this one. Would you agree, this is from Pamela, would you agree that as a writer, you're only as good as the books you read?
I don't know. There have been writers who barely read and have written fantastic books.
Very few of them.
Very few. But I mean, it should be possible, I guess, to be better than if you've never read, to still write a very good book.
Sure.
I don't know.
I think you have to read.
Well, you need to read at least something, but
I think you can learn as much from
the inside of a medication box.
I mean, I don't want
if you
to
have
be
a great imagination,
but
you have a great story in your head, and you can put sentences together, you probably will be able to write a book without having read all the classics.
It's a stretch. I think it's a stretch. Earlier this week, we were talking about somebody who said, you have to have read 1,000 books Who said that? Somebody said that. Dion Mayer
Oh, yeah?
said that. I don't know. I mean, it's like the 10,000 hours. I don't know
Yeah.
if it's hogwash
Yeah.
or whether there's something in it.
But I think no matter what you read, it teaches you something. So
Can
you
I say
don't.
one? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Finish? No, I wanted to say one more thing about flow. Because sometimes your flow also happens in your editing. When you have written and stumbled and difficulties and blah, 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 and then you got this thing, and then you go and edit, and then you enter into that flow, and suddenly things work out much better. So don't give up. You know, get something down there and then work on that. And your flow may only happen then.
And if you want to join us next year for Venice, we have our dates. 1st of October, 1 week or two. So the 1st to the
14th.
The 8th.
15th.
Yeah, but that's the 2 weeks.
That's
so
the
you
2
can
weeks.
do 1st week, 2nd week, or both weeks. We'd love to have you. And if you contact us now for those dates next year, you can join us for this year's prices. So that's a big incentive, actually. So we would love to
The biggest
have you.
incentive is that it is the most fantastic experience.
Can we hear it
Can-
from? Yeah. Yeah.
We had to hire this crowd in just
off the canal.
off the streets.
A rent a crowd.
Thank you for joining us. You know, as always, we love, I mean, we couldn't have these obviously without you.
Well, we could.
And and you're an amazing community. So we love you. Thank you.
Cheers. Empty glass.
Empty glass.